You do not remember the exact day your old life ended. In times like these, days lose meaning. Morning and night blur into the same grey weight of exhaustion, smoke, and death. You only remember the moment you were told to report to the burial grounds, because there were no more healthy men left to refuse the job. A grave digger was not chosen for honour or skill anymore. It was simply one of the few tasks still needed more than it was feared. The plague had already taken the rest. When you arrive at the edge of the burial field, the first thing you notice is the smell. It is not the smell of fresh earth or wet grass. It is something deeper, heavier, almost physical. A mixture of decay, burning wood, and sickness carried on the wind. The ground itself seems changed, as if it has absorbed too much death to remain normal soil. Wooden carts creak nearby, carrying wrapped bodies that no one dares to look at for too long. The drivers do not speak. Speaking feels unnecessary when everything around you already says enough. Your tools are simple: a shovel, a pickaxe, and a rope. In another time, these would be ordinary instruments. Now they feel like extensions of something darker. You are shown where to dig. There is no ceremony, no instruction beyond pointing. The pits must be deep and fast. There is no time for careful work. The dead arrive faster than the ground can accept them. You start digging. The soil is harder than expected. Not because it is rocky, but because it is cold and dry from repeated disturbance. Beneath your shovel, you sometimes hit layers of older graves that were never fully settled. The earth is becoming a stacked memory of the dead. Each strike of metal against soil feels like interrupting something that should have been left untouched. But there is no pause. There cannot be. As you work, you notice the other grave diggers. They move like machines that have forgotten they are human. Their faces are covered with cloth, but even through it you can see exhaustion. No one looks at each other for long. Eye contact feels dangerous, as if recognition might force you to acknowledge something you are trying to survive by ignoring. Above the pit, carts continue to arrive. Some bodies are wrapped in simple linen, others are barely covered at all. There is no longer enough cloth for dignity. You begin to realize that dignity has become a luxury of the past. A priest sometimes appears, murmuring prayers quickly, but even prayer feels rushed, as though words themselves are running out of time. The work is endless. Hours pass without clear beginning or end. Your arms ache, your back stiffens, and your breath becomes heavy under the cloth covering your face. Sweat mixes with cold air, creating a constant dampness that clings to your skin. Still, you continue, because stopping means falling behind, and falling behind means something worse, being replaced by someone else who is also already dying inside. At some point, you stop thinking of the bodies as people, not because you are cruel, but because your mind cannot hold so many lives at once. It becomes simpler to think of them as weight, as necessity, as something that must be placed into the ground before it spreads further into the world above. This thought haunts you later, but in the moment, it is the only way to continue. The burial pits begin to fill faster than they can be closed. Sometimes bodies are layered in rows, one on top of another, separated only by thin soil. There is no time for individual graves. The earth becomes a shared space for hundreds of endings. You notice how quickly the idea of individuality disappears. Names, faces, stories, all of it dissolves into a single collective silence. At midday, if it can be called that, the light changes slightly. The sun is still there, but it feels distant, as if separated from the world you are in. Birds no longer gather near the field. Even nature seems to understand that this place is not meant for life. The only sound is digging, wheels creaking, and the occasional distant cough that reminds you the plague is not limited to the dead. You hear rumours as you work. People speak in fragments, entire families gone in days, streets emptied overnight, houses sealed with markings. You try not to listen too closely, but silence in such a place is never truly silence. It is filled with information you did not ask for, but cannot escape. At times, bodies arrive that are still warm. This is the part no one speaks of openly. There are moments when death and life are too close to distinguish clearly. You are told not to question it. Your job is not judgment. Your job is placement. Still, something inside you tightens each time it happens. You work faster afterward, as if speed can protect you from thought. The most difficult part is not the digging. It is the waiting between arrivals. In those moments you stand in a field of half-filled graves and realize how quickly the world has changed. Only weeks ago, this land was ordinary soil. Now it is structured like a map of loss. You begin to understand that history is not written only in books or battles, but also in places like this, quiet, hidden, and unbearable. As evening approaches, the air grows colder. Smoke from burning pyres drifts across the field, carried by wind that seems directionless. Some bodies are burned instead of buried, especially when the ground cannot hold more. The firelight reflects on exhausted faces, making everyone look like shadows of themselves. You continue working. There is no formal end to the day. Work ends only when the carts stop coming, and they rarely stop because death does not follow human schedules. Eventually, your body simply reaches a point where movement slows, and supervisors allow rest. Rest, however, is not comfort. It is collapse. You lie down near the edge of the field, still smelling earth and smoke. Sleep comes quickly, but it is not peaceful. Dreams are fragmented, filled with digging that never ends, soil that refills itself, and silence that presses down like weight. When you wake, nothing has improved. The plague is still present. The pits are still waiting. The carts are already arriving again. Days turn into weeks in this rhythm. The work changes you in ways you cannot immediately see. Your hands become stronger, but your sense of time weakens. Your emotions begin to flatten, not because you no longer feel, but because feeling everything would make continuation impossible. Survival becomes mechanical. Occasionally, you wonder what life was like before this. The memory feels distant, almost unreal. Markets, conversations, laughter, these things feel like stories told about another world that no longer exists. You are still the same person, but the world around you has stripped meaning from almost everything that once defined you. Yet even here, in this field of constant burial, there are moments that remind you of humanity. A colleague silently sharing water, a nod of recognition after a difficult day, a brief pause when a particularly heavy load is carried. These small gestures do not stop death, but they prevent complete disappearance of what it means to be human. Eventually, you realize something uncomfortable. You have become part of history, not as a hero or survivor in the traditional sense, but as a witness to the scale of suffering that most will never see. Your work will not be celebrated. It will likely be forgotten. But without it, the world above would collapse even faster, and so you continue. Not because it is bearable, but because it is necessary. Each grave you dig is not just an end, but also a form of containment, a boundary placed between chaos and what remains of order. The plague may take lives, but your labour determines where those lives settle afterward. When the epidemic eventually slows, because all epidemics eventually do, you will not notice it immediately. The carts will simply stop coming as frequently. The field will grow quieter. The air will feel slightly less heavy. but the soil will remain. And so will you, changed permanently by what you have seen and done. Not a hero, not a victim, but something in between. Someone who stood at the edge of life and death and worked without stopping while the world fell apart above you. This is what it meant to be a gravedigger during the plague's peak.